Okay, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here this evening. I'd like to just give you a really warm welcome and thank you for joining me tonight. I was really surprised. We had a lot of interest in this webinar, and we have well over 250 people registered, pushing close to 300. So, it tells me there's a really lot of interest in the topic, which is exciting. Our webinar is being recorded, so if you come late, leave early, if you have to step out for any reason, it's okay, because we're recording this and we'll send it out through email within the next 24 hours or so. So while I'm introducing myself, would you mind just go ahead, pop into your chat and give a shout out using the chat feature. Maybe tell us, we can see your names in your video, but maybe tell us where you're from, what age students you work with, and possibly what position you hold professionally. It's kind of neat to see where we're all coming from. And go ahead and start that, and I'll just keep introducing myself. Looking at the registrants for this conference, we have people from all over the country, and I counted 3 different countries, international attendance: India, Australia, and Thailand. And Canada, actually. So there's a 4th. So very exciting. We've got some hellos popping into our chat here. And I should say, if you don't have your microphone muted, go ahead and mute your mic so we don't get any disturbance here. So we've got Ontario. Looks like we've got Bermuda, Virginia. I'll let you go ahead and pop in and take a look at all those countries people are coming from, states people are coming from. I don't have a moderator for this webinar, so I'll leave that up to you. So, if we haven't met before, my name is Kelly Steinke. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm a teacher, and I love working with teachers. And you might just be wondering how I ended up doing what I'm doing professionally. Like, why am I here giving this webinar? Well, I'll start with what I'm not. I am definitely not a researcher, but I am a consumer of the research. I really don't consider myself a presenter, though I am comfortable presenting. I think that comes with teaching. And I do believe that if you're an expert on a topic or have expert knowledge on a topic, it's important to share that knowledge. And keeping it to yourself doesn't help the greater good and the greater community. So I guess I would consider myself more of an advocate than anything. I advocate for those whose needs aren't being met in the schools or through the school systems. And I do so through working with teachers, which is a real pleasure. So, I found the way into the field of dyslexia and learning disabilities really because I'm a former special ed teacher. And more importantly, I'm the mother of 2 college-age children who are both diagnosed with dyslexia. Between the 2 of them, we have a little bit of dysgraphia, ADHD, dyscalculia, all mixed in as well. So we kind of got the full meal deal there. And currently, I'm working as the founder of Read Learning Educational Services, also the author of Silver Moon Spelling Rules Curriculum. I currently teach as an instructor at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in the special education department on literacy, of course. And I am the former president of the Wisconsin IDA branch, and I served on that board for about 7 years. And I see a couple of our folks here right now, which is exciting. So this presentation was actually given a couple years back. It was offered through the IDA National Conference in 2021. And this is the first time I've offered it since that conference. I revised it quite a bit just because I have a really difficult time offering the same presentation in exactly the same manner and same format. I think it's a teacher thing. We're always trying to improve and learn and do better. So, I would like to just give you another warm welcome here. Thank you to everyone who said hi in the chat. And I'm actually going to paste in a shared Google link that you could use to get access to this PowerPoint. And so I'm going to send that over to everyone right now. So if, I know this wasn't sent ahead of time, but if you'd like to print it while you're sitting here on the presentation, you could print and you could just take notes, real time. So here we go. We're going to talk quite a bit here about this word, this fun word, conundrum. And conundrum is just, it quite accurately conveys how a lot of teachers are feeling about their students' spelling and their spelling instruction. And a conundrum is defined as a confusing or difficult problem or question. Now, a common reason for confusion is simply a lack of information or a lack of understanding. I'm going to share a quick story to illustrate this. When I was a special ed teacher, our district was short subs. As so many of our districts are very short on subs. My principal comes into my room in the morning. He asks me to sub for the day in a general education kindergarten classroom. I was used to teaching intermediate level, so 4th through 6th grade resource room at that time. So my groups were small. My students are quite a bit older. So for me, this was a conundrum of a major scale to ask me to walk into a classroom of 20 kindergarten students for the entire day with no sub plans, no aides, no experience. So if there's kindergarten teachers here, I think you're all really amazing. I did survive the day. The kids did survive the day, more importantly, and the room did not look as bad as the picture here on my slideshow. This is kind of what I pictured it looking like by the end of the day. A disaster, kids crawling from the ceiling. So today we're going to discuss spelling conundrums, 3 of them that, if addressed, would be beneficial for all learners, but especially our most needy learners, our students with dyslexia and dysgraphia. I know we have some experts in the house here, and I know we'll have plenty watching this as a recording, but I also know we probably have some novices and probably everyone in between. So let's take a few minutes to take a look at what the researchers are saying when it comes to spelling, spelling research, reading research, and just let's establish a common ground. So in 2005, we got Judith Birch, who is a researcher and author, and she's quoted as saying, spelling is one of the most important and most forgotten aspects of literacy development. In many classroom settings, it's looked at as an afterthought, and instruction is limited to rote spelling drills and memorization. Okay. Then we have a much older quote from 1966. And this quote says that when all is said and done, approximately 80% of our English words are reliable to read and spell if orthographic patterns have been mastered. Okay. Here's a much longer quote. And this is actually taken from a fact sheet on the International Dyslexia Association's website. If you're not familiar with their fact sheets, it's a great source for information. I share these out all the time just because they're so reliable, succinct, they're to the point. And bear with me here because I am going to read this one out loud to you. This is a longer one. This says that the spelling system, the English language spelling system, is not crazy or unpredictable. It can be taught as a system that makes sense. Nearly 50% of English words are predictable based on letter-sound correspondences alone. And an additional 37% of the more common words are almost predictable except for one sound. Other information, such as the language the word came from, word meaning, also helps explain spellings of words, but only 4% of English words are truly irregular and may have to be learned through whole word methods, such as tracing, saying the letters while the word is being memorized. This really spoke to me, when I first went down this journey of learning about dyslexia and spelling, and this spoke volumes to me. So I did want to share this quote with you. Then we move on to 97 with Brady and Motes. They are quoted by saying, without direct and explicit spelling instruction, many children will struggle to spell and write, even if their reading is at or above grade level. And, the research really, it goes on and on. There is extensive research on the spelling reading connection and the necessity for phoneme graphing mapping. So here you're going to recognize a lot of these researchers. We got Berninger, Airy, Grace, Catherine Snow, all showing evidence that, there is a writing route to reading, essentially. That, if you can teach a child to spell using an explicit and systematic approach, you will also be teaching them to read. But the opposite is not true. Lastly, I have to throw Scarborough's rope in here just to establish our common ground wrap up, because one of my colleagues and I, we always joke that you can't have a presentation on spelling or reading and not have Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. So here we have it. This reading rope analogy was created in 2001. It's a way to explain the complexities of reading and the interconnectedness of, all of these skills that it takes to become a skilled reader. And you can see in the top section of this rope, we've got the language comprehension section and all of these kind of subcategories, this background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures. A lot of this content is what students bring to the table. It's what they come to school with most often. And our bottom section of the rope in the bottom left-hand corner is most often what needs to be taught explicitly. And some students will pick up on reading and spelling really no matter how you're teaching, but we know that all of our, our students with dyslexia, our students with dysgraphia, they do need very explicit and very systematic approaches to make progress in those areas. You fashion these things together, all of these skills work together to fashion a tight-knit rope, essentially, which is our skilled reader. So there's our research. So let's move on here. If we know that this is the case, then we know that learning to spell, it will enhance reading, it will enhance writing and overall literacy. Furthermore, if a person's spelling is labor intensive, they will spend an inordinate amount of cognitive resources and time on spelling, when those resources could be devoted to higher level skills, comprehension, composition, critical thinking. That's something to keep in mind. I do think someone's microphone might be on right now because I'm just getting some feedback. If you could just check your mics to make sure they're off, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much. And if you're joining us late, thank you for jumping in. We are recording the webinar, so don't worry, you'll receive the recording and so you'll get to watch what you've missed. So our goals today are threefold. We're going to talk about these 3 spelling conundrums. First one being, why isn't spelling being taught in a manner that supports reading and helps all students build a deeper understanding of the English language? Our second conundrum being, what's the content I need to teach? What challenges am I going to see along the way when I'm teaching? And thirdly, how can spelling be taught in a way that makes sense, builds understanding, is memorable and fun? All important questions to consider. So now I want you to take a trip back in your memories. And I want you to think back to when you were a kid in elementary school. Did you have spelling tests? If you did, what were they like? How did you practice for them? Maybe you had a spelling workbook, maybe you didn't. Maybe you loved spelling. You were in all the spelling bees. Maybe you hated spelling, maybe neither. Maybe you just survived it. It was somewhere in between for you. I'm going to describe 3 kinds of spellers, and I want you to determine which kind of speller you were when you were in elementary school. Here's my first one. I call it the slam dunk speller. We're going to get a little help from Michael Jordan on this one. I do live in the Midwest, very close to the Chicago area. So Michael Jordan, is pretty exciting in his heyday. Now, if you're a slam dunk speller, it means that you probably remember getting a new spelling list every Monday. You probably glanced at it a couple times before the test. You probably aced the test, earned a star on the classroom spelling chart. So many of the classrooms had the big spelling charts on the wall. And you probably felt like the Michael Jordan of spelling. You're feeling pretty competent. You can't really remember studying for spelling as a kid. Maybe you studied once or twice here and there. Spelling was a slam dunk for you. Okay, that's our first kind of speller. Now, our second kind of speller, though, is what I call a contemplative speller. You also got a list of words on Monday. You spent hours studying your list of words. One of your parents quizzed you. You quizzed yourself over and over. You wrote your words a million times, so you'd remember them all, and you still forgot a lot of your spellings. Going into the test on Friday, you'd think, well, I guess I'm as ready as I'll ever be. You even had a little trick. Listen to this. You prayed your teacher wouldn't catch on. When you got your blank piece of paper out to take your spelling test, before your teacher actually started giving the test, you wrote as many words as you could remember real lightly in the margin of your paper. This helped because otherwise you'd forget them if they were too far down the list. So you just erase this little cheat sheet before you turn the test in. The problem was there are only so many words you could do this for. With 20 spelling words, your fingers were crossed that you'd be able to tell if the rest of them looked right. This little strategy made you super nervous, though. It wasn't cheating, was it? I mean, you studied for hours. With any luck, you'd pass a few of the words, but you usually bombed the test. You got 3 or 4 words right, typically. Bummer. Our next kind of speller is, and I had it, but now I don't speller. This is our third. So if you're not a slam dunk speller, you're not a contemplative speller, you're probably this kind of speller. You'd study for your spelling test. You'd get real good grades, sometimes 100%. But the problem was a week later, it was all gone. It's like those spelling words just evaporated into thin air. You thought, well, at least I have a passing grade. Those are our 3 types of spellers. Could you identify with any of those? If you applied that to your classrooms, nowadays, which types of spellers would your students be? Let me just get my slides lined up here. So just for fun, let's level the playing field just a bit. Let's say we take our slam dunk spellers and we ask them why their given words are spelled the way they are. You know what? They'd probably perform similarly to our other 2 types of spellers if they were asked why, to explain the reasoning behind the spelling patterns. So just because some people are born good spellers, it doesn't mean they automatically have a deep understanding of our English language spelling rules. And if you ask them why they spelled a word the way they did, the answer you'll often hear is, I don't know. It's just spelled that way. But if you're a bad speller, this why, it's the missing link. This is the information that's going to improve spelling, the explicit teaching of spelling rules and phonic patterns and word structure, meaning and origin, all the important parts of why we spell the way we do. So teaching a deeper understanding of the why we spell the way we do is really a win-win for everyone. It's going to help our MJs of spelling, it's going to help our contemplative spellers, and it's going to help our I had it but lost it spellers. So when I refer to spelling instruction in this webinar, just so we're all on the same page, I'm referring to a specific type of spelling instruction. I'm referring to Orton-Gillingham-based instruction, also known as or sometimes called structured literacy-based instruction. This instruction has a reciprocal relationship with reading. And it encompasses all the characteristics on this slide. It really does flip-flop back and forth between speech to print and print to speech. Speech, you see, from encoding to decoding and decoding to encoding. We're not going to delve deep into what this methodology is, simply because that would be a totally different presentation. But if you find that you need some more information on this, contact me. I'll get you pointed in the right direction. I'm happy to help. So here's some food for thought, just some things to keep in mind throughout the presentation. And this isn't really food for thought to ponder. This is what the research has proven and showed us. Spelling problems don't occur in isolation. If there's spelling issues, the most common reasons for those spelling issues are a specific learning disability like dyslexia or dysgraphia. Secondly, spelling's not a feat of sheer determination. You can't will yourself into becoming a good speller. And it's not a feat of visual memory, as was once thought, back in the 19th century. The thought was memorize, 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 and you'll get those spelling words right. And if you don't, well, you're probably lazy, you hadn't studied enough. This is just not true. Thirdly, there is a direct and reciprocal relationship between reading and spelling. It's, one of the most overlooked tools for strengthening reading is spelling. And I wonder, how many educators are aware of this? I wish more people knew about this. And fourthly, by third grade, students should be ready to master syllabication, so they should be aware of all 6 or 7 types of syllable patterns, depending on how you teach your syllable patterns, and they should know about schwa, which is oftentimes unheard of by teachers. So, back to our first conundrum. Here's a possible thought process, and actually I'm going to front load this with a little bit of a story. I was trained a long time ago as a facilitator for difficult IEP meetings. I found it so fascinating, this facilitation cadre I became a part of, that I went on to become a community mediator. My friends all thought I was nuts. I go into these really difficult meetings and help facilitate communication, so that both parties could walk away feeling heard with a solution that didn't involve a lawsuit. And I learned that the problem that's being debated in these really heated emotional meetings are different from the actual deep-seated issue that lurks underneath the problem. Let me give you an example of what I mean here. The neighbor that complains about their dogs, neighbors' dogs or chickens or other animals disturbing their yard or peace and quiet, is always more upset about the underlying lack of respect their neighbors show by allowing such behaviors to continue, right? They're upset that their neighbors don't understand that there's a problem. They're not apologetic. They're not helping them come up with a solution. And it really comes down to a lack of respect. It's not the rooster crowing. It's not the dog going in the neighbor's yard. It's a lack of respect. And so, I use this thought process a lot to think about a lot of issues, honestly. And I've applied it to this whole topic of literacy reform and the reading crisis that our country is facing here in the United States. And specifically, using spelling as a vehicle to improve literacy. And the top 3 complaints I hear from educators or administrators on spelling are: 1, it takes up time. Our days are full. We have a lot of things to teach. We don't have the time. The second complaint I hear is, this has taken up a lot of energy and I feel like I'm just spinning my wheels, like a pinwheel just kind of spins around. And thirdly, I'm not sure I see an academic benefit. Nothing's changing. I'm teaching spelling, but my Michael Jordans of spelling are still Michael Jordans. My contemplators are still contemplating, and my have it but lost it's, they're never going to have it. These are all problems that teachers are dealing with. And they're symptoms of a bigger issue. You know, these issues go quite a bit deeper. So underneath these issues, I would like to propose that it really comes down to a lack of understanding, lack of training, lack of skills. And you'll get glimpses of this if you consider how spelling is addressed or not addressed on district or school-based assessments, on state assessments, and in teacher prep or training programs. You know, it really comes down to a systemic problem. So I would like to predict that if we could find a way to dedicate some time, some energy, and some unified training on systematic and explicit spelling instruction, that we'd start to see our complaints, our time, energy, no benefit, start to dissipate. And we'd start to gain some traction on this literacy gap that many of our students are experiencing. So, you know, this first conundrum, it's really something that doesn't have a direct answer. You know, we gave some theories here in the webinar tonight. You might have some other theories, but I'd like you just to pause and reflect, you know, think about this. If you have your paper in front of your PowerPoint notes or a piece of paper in front of you, maybe you want to pause to just jot down some thoughts. You know, why isn't spelling be taught in a manner that supports reading and helps students build a deeper understanding of the English language? Why do you think that's true in your school, in your district, in your state? Okay, this leads us to our second conundrum of the evening, which is, what's the content I need to teach? And what challenges will I see along the way? With this, I think it's important to set the stage here in terms of spelling developments. Now, this resource was taken from Reading Rockets, and I really enjoy using Reading Rockets for their resources on reading and spelling and anything literacy. And you're going to see that there are 5 stages of spelling development that students kind of go through within their spelling development years, for lack of better words. They start at the pre-communicative stage. They move into the semi-phonetic stage, to the phonetic, to the transitional, to the correct spelling stage. Now, the pre-communicative and semi-phonetic, these are stages that are primarily at around the pre-K and kindergarten levels. Your phonetic stages begin in kindergarten or first grade, depending on the students. And it's important to note that kids will fluctuate a little bit between stages. You know, they're not always solidly in one stage or the other. They may be in between stages, but they're not going to make drastic jumps. You know, they're not going to make a big jump from transitional back down to semi-phonetic. So a lot of students I work with who have dyslexia or dysgraphia are stuck somewhere between that phonetic and transitional stage of spelling. You know, poor spelling is the common denominator for these 2 types of learning disabilities. Dyslexia always comes with some spelling issues, and dysgraphia often comes with spelling issues. So knowing the stages of spelling hopefully will give you an idea of where your students are in their spelling development and further help you drive your instruction. Speaking of spelling development, here's a funny for today. I think all of you probably got this mailer in your inbox yesterday, and let's see if anyone caught the spelling mistake. Do you see it? I'm trying to get some faces here, but most of you have your cameras turned off. If you check out the word conundrum, this was planted. You know, and with over 250 people registered for this webinar, I had one person reach out and say, hey, did you realize that conundrum is spelled wrong? I bet you did that on purpose because it's a spelling webinar. You got it. We planted this one. And this is a great example of phonetic spelling. So you got to have a little fun and work in life. And so this was our fun. I'm not sure how many of you noticed. I'm guessing the rest of you were maybe just too polite to say anything. I'm just looking at our chat here. Mary, thanks for your chat. Here, I'll just read this. It says, and even with those irregular words, there is usually only one part of the word that's irregular. Using the heart word process is helpful. Absolutely, that heart word process. I do like that process for our irregulars, and you probably said that earlier. I'm just catching it now. All right. So moving on from our funny for the evening. This colorful cake was made by my sister-in-law. It looks amazing, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like it's store-bought. So she has a tradition of going above and beyond for birthdays. And my niece wanted a rainbow unicorn cake for her 9th birthday. So my sister-in-law, you know, that's what she does. You know, so 6 layers later, a whole lot of patience, a whole lot of food coloring and frosting. You know, she really had a masterpiece. I think this cake makes a great analogy to spelling, because I like to think of spelling as having layers. You know, if we can think of spelling in layers, we'll make sure not to forget anything important. You wouldn't want to forget one of these layers in this rainbow cake, or you wouldn't have a complete rainbow, which would be sad for a 9-year-old. So first layer, I like to think of as a regular phonetic spelling layer. There are no rules in this layer, nothing unexpected. With this layer, you might ask yourself, is this word a straightforward word? Are there any rules in the word? Are there any irregularities? If there's nothing there, it's just a regular phonetic spelling. Secondly, our second layer to spelling is your rule-based layer. You know, so here you're asking yourself, is there a rule I can apply to this word? You know, spelling rules they have a bad rap. They really do. There's so many myths floating around about spelling rules being so unreliable, but really and truly, they are very reliable, especially when the instructor knows, you know, what the common rule breakers are and can explain those rule breakers. Usually they're explainable. This accounts for a good number of our English language words. I'm going to welcome folks that are still popping in. And if you have your mic on, would you just mind popping that off? Just give a quick check, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. Thank you. Something to note about rule-based spelling. You know, in many of our words, we have sounds that can be pronounced, you know, a few different ways, or more than a few different ways. And this is when you get into a conversation about spelling choices. And spelling choices come into play when you're teaching the rules. The vowel teams are a great example of this. You'll teach a base rule for the most common spellings based on usually positionality within a word, and you'll add more options, you know, in order of frequency within our language. So let me give you an example. This is how I think of this. The vowel team AY, right? This vowel team is used at the end of words to produce a long vowel sound, a long A sound. But it's not going to be used at the beginning of words. It's not going to be used in the middle of words unless you have a compound word. So if you wanted a long A in the middle of a word, you'd look to your other choices, like AI, as in the word sail. And if this isn't correct, you'd try possibly another spelling choice, possibly EA, like in steak, or EI, as in vein, which both are a little less common in frequency. So we can lay our foundation with a rule base, knowing that we're going to build some spelling choices into that rule base. Thirdly, we've got etymology. You know, etymology is simply, where does the word come from? Because there's patterns we can catch on to if we know the word origin. Sometimes this can be also tied to a rule. Let me explain what I mean by this. So if you take the sound which is spelled with the CT, this indicates a Latin word origin. Here's another example. When you see Y's in the middle of words for short I or long I, this indicates a Greek word origin. which is often indicative of our science words. So, some examples of our science words with Y's in the middle: physician, hypothalamus, physics, symphony, all tied to those sciencey type words. Fourth, we have morphology. Now, morphology, with this concept, you're asking yourself, can I spell this word or word part based on what I know about its related word? Based on what I know about its meaning? Is there a suffix? Is there a prefix that I can identify? How does this suffix or prefix affect the base or possibly the root? So for morphology is word meaning. So you're delving into what you know about the word and its meaning, and that can help our spelling as well. And lastly, we have these irregular words. And this is when you really do get into having to memorize some of these word patterns using some simultaneously multisensory approaches. The heart words are a great example. That whole process for irregular words is fantastic. So all of the layers play an important role in spelling, just as all of the layers of this cake are important in making a full rainbow. What I have found with my work with struggling readers and spellers is that the easiest, most logical way to approach spelling is by presenting the rules and adding other layers as we go. So we're building that cake as we go. So let's take a look at basic phonemic patterns. Let's look at how spelling and writing of sounds breaks down. So we need to know where we're starting and know where we're going in order to get our students there. Once a student has their basic letter sound correspondence mastered, this is really it's a non-negotiable. They need that letter sound correspondence. Then they're ready to start blending and building their ability to spell and read basic phonemic patterns. Use real words and nonsense words at each step of the way. It's only going to make your students stronger with these phonemic patterns, and we're going to build up words into more complex patterns as you go. So as you can see, you can start with a simple vowel consonant pattern, as in the word up. A nonsense word might be ip. You can add a consonant to the beginning, get the word cup. We can move on to add two consonants at the end. So we have our blend at the end, our blends at the beginning, our 3-letter blends, 2-letter blends, so on and so forth. So we're building in complexity as we go. These patterns are essential to master because they are the building blocks of course, multisyllable words. So, another resource I found, interestingly enough, from an unknown source, I found this online. So if anyone knows where this came from, this phonics development continuum, I'd be interested in knowing. I do hear a microphone on. If you could mute your mic, please. I'm so distractible. I'm sorry. Very good. Awesome. So the spelling developmental continuum is good. This is a really great continuum. It's a great example. It's not the only example. There are other examples out there of how to systematically, you know what? We do have some voices going back here. If you could mute your mic here, I'm just going to do some muting here on my own. Now I think we've got everyone quiet. Thank you. It's a great example of how, what kind of order you could have that would be developmentally appropriate to start spelling instruction at your kindergarten level and moving on up through your first grade level here. So let's take a look at how this breaks down. Inventive spelling is encouraged in kindergarten. There's a lot of different names for this. Some people call it kindergarten spelling, transitional spelling, temporary spelling, sound spelling. Sometimes we just say it's spelling that makes us smile. It's adorable spelling, right? It's adorable in a kindergartner, not a 7th or 8th grader. So what is inventive spelling? It's when kids are applying sounds and symbols and letter patterns that are not the same as conventional orthography. Kindergarten concepts and spelling that you want to teach are your letter names, your letter sounds, your letter formation, your phonemic awareness. And by the end of kindergarten, students should be able to rapidly name their letters. They should be able to give the most common sounds of letters. They should write letters for most consonants and short vowel sounds. They should be spelling simple CVC and some high frequency words. You see, as you go through this list of development, you really can't divorce the reading from the spelling. I mean, they're just so intertwined. They should be able to do some pretty key phonemic awareness skills as well, counting the number of sounds and words. They should be able to represent those numbers of sounds with a manipulative, like a token or a tile. And they should be able to listen for certain sounds and words as well. We're going to cruise through this pretty quickly because I am watching our time here and we've got a lot to get through tonight. So if you do have questions, we will have time for Q&A at the end, and we can also chat after the webinar is done if you want to touch base together. So in first grade, I've got a bunch of first grade spelling concepts listed here, but the important thing to note here is that in first grade, kids have moved past invented spelling. So in a typically developing student, they're not using invented spelling anymore in first grade. They're starting to learn spelling generalizations. You could call those spelling rules. I call them spelling rules. I just think it's easier to say. The floss rule, the rule for when to use K versus C at the beginning of words, when to use CH versus TCH. They're learning basic silent E patterns. There's a lot of really important concepts that students are wrestling with and learning in the first grade. As we move on in spelling development, in second grade, students get more complex words. They get into multisyllable word spellings, and they really are, by the end of second grade, should be taught the remaining syllable types and patterns. They're learning suffix spelling rules, common prefixes, and the world's kind of exploding for these kids in terms of writing ability and spelling and reading ability. It's a very exciting time for a student because by third grade, researchers are saying that students should be familiar with all 7 types of syllables, possibly 6. Maybe you teach 6 syllables. It doesn't matter if you teach 6 or 7. It just matters that you keep it consistent with your students. They should know some syllable division patterns and rules. They should be familiar with schwa spelling patterns, compound words, most common prefixes and suffixes, and this is all by the third grade. So in fourth grade and beyond, we're looking at Latin and Greek influences, combining forms, and things just get more and more complex as you go up in the grade levels. So this is a lot of content for kids to master. And, especially when we're getting students, now I come from a special education background, and I've always worked with students who have struggles in reading and struggles in spelling and writing. And so when we're getting students that aren't identified as having problems in these areas until 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and even higher, we're having to backtrack quite a bit, aren't we? These skills are really non-negotiable, and you really do need to backtrack and make sure they have their letter sound correspondence, no matter their age. Make sure they have the ability to perceive sounds within words. So what I did for you is I kind of went through and I created a list of really common challenges to watch out for. Because what I find is that when I'm working with teachers, they often find that they get stuck at a certain point, or they hit a wall with a student and they're not real sure how to get past that point, how to get past that wall. So these are some things to watch out for. One common challenge is the inability to perceive individual speech sounds. And this relates back to auditory discrimination and or phoneme segmentation. And I'm just going to mute some more microphones here. If you just hopped on, go ahead and mute your mic for me. Thank you so much. So this is really important that kids can hear the differences between individual speech sounds, and they can discriminate between very similar speech sounds. I have a screener that I like to use for this. If you think this might be a struggle for some of your students, I'll show you what that screener is in just a moment. You can kind of take a little deeper look there. Secondly, another common challenge is inaccurate letter sound correspondence. And no matter the student's age, I teach undergrad seniors who are education students at one of our local universities. I always say, it doesn't matter what their age is. If they're in 8th grade and they can't remember the letter sound correspondence for even 3 or 4 common letters, it's going to create a problem. It's going to create a problem in their reading. It's going to create a problem in their writing. So we've got to plug those holes. At a lower level, when students are younger and they're just working on those letter sound correspondences, the letter names themselves can be confusing because not all the names begin with the sounds that they make. So this is something I didn't learn until later on in my teaching career, but let me explain this to you. This answered a lot of questions for me. Many students, for example, confuse the sound for the letter Y. Okay, oftentimes students will think the letter Y says W. And it's simply because the name Y starts with W. But of course, the Y says Y. Okay, here's another example. The letter C. The letter C's most common sound, of course, is, but the name itself, C, starts with what sound? S. Okay, this can be confusing for even our older students, and it's oftentimes why students produce that soft sound for C more frequently than they do the hard sound for C. Although it is a viable sound for C, it will only occur, of course, with an EI or Y after it. Another example of this that I see over and over again is the letter G, the letter sound correspondence for the letter G. What sound do your students, if they're going to mix up this letter sound, what sound do they often say? J, right? It is a legitimate sound for the G when you've got that EIY after it, but the more common sound for G is the hard sound. It's the G sound. But the logic there is that the letter name G actually starts with the sound J. So there's a logic to some of the sound errors your students might be making. Now, if your students just have a few sound errors, no matter their age, I'd recommend supporting those by assigning a keyword to the target letters in their sound. Now, I'm going to show you an example of this on our next slide. And the more correct repetitions you can get, the more you can get the child to produce the correct sound in replace of the old habit, the incorrect habits, the quicker they're going to learn it and the better they're going to be off in their reading and spelling. Third, students can have an issue with weak working memory. This is something to really keep an eye on, and it might be something that doesn't often come to mind right away. You can support weak working memory with visuals. Visuals are so important to support this. You think about as adults, what do we do so we don't forget things? We write ourselves Post-it notes. We keep signs or agendas or schedules in our field of vision so we can see them. Also, if we forget things quite often that we need to use on a regular basis, we might look them up, right? We're on our phones, we're on our computers. Back in the day, we just grab out a dictionary or whatever it might be, and we'd look things up. So for this piece, I'd encourage you to have your students create a resource folder with key concepts that they can reference. And this, you can also integrate your visuals into that resource folder. Thirdly, for that weak working memory, you can ask guided questions. Try to lead students to coming up with that answer on their own. Lead them down that path of critical thinking. Fourth, students may have difficulty integrating information. This is also called flexible thinking. This is where it gets really important to show connections between new material and previously learned material. We learn new information by connecting it to previously learned information. And so make sure your connections are really concrete. Give students visuals once again. Make sure they can connect what they're learning with pre-existing information, with their background knowledge. Now, we're going to look at a lot of visual examples soon here in this presentation. And fifthly, if students hear a word correctly, versus how they think it sounds, it makes a big difference. So when you're having students practice spelling, make sure they repeat the word to you before they write it down, because oftentimes students think they heard a word correctly, but really they're perceiving it how they think they heard it, which is incorrect. If that makes any sense at all. I hope that made sense how I described that. So all challenges to watch out for, and there are good supports for these challenges that you can use. Here's that keyword sound chart that I referred to just moments ago. These are really cool because you can individualize them for any student, any age. You can individualize a sound chart for a 6-year-old or for a 15-year-old. Essentially, you're just taking the common miscues that the student has with their letter sound correspondence. You're having them think of a keyword for that miscue. So for instance, my student, her name was Genesis. She could never remember the sound correspondence for the letters on this page, the M, the H, the G, the CH, and so on. And so I'd say to her, now Genesis, let's come up with a word that starts with that tricky sound that you have a hard time remembering. And so let's start with the letter M. What's a word we could, think of that starts with And she came up with the moon. She likes to look at the moon at nighttime. And so before she would get to spelling or reading, if I knew this was a common miscue for her, I'd kind of preemptively strike and I'd say, you know what? We're going to come across one of your tricky sounds. Let's look at your sound charts. You have it right next to you. It's important to keep these out on the table next to the students. And let's just double check to make sure you get the sound correct when you're spelling, or make sure you get the sound correct when you're reading. And these are great. They're great tools because you can keep them in the child's resource folder as one of their key tools. You can keep them in their field of vision, which is different from having a huge alphabet chart on the wall in the classroom. Where those get tricky is just having too much visual stimuli in one spot. All of the alphabet letters, all of the pictures, all of the sounds. This is great because it brings it down to just what the student needs to work through, and it really does individualize things for them. So this is a good strategy to support tricky sounds. Okay, how's everyone doing out there? I hope you're still with me. It's been almost an hour. We're going to keep forging ahead. All teachers realize that assessment should inform our instruction. And so one question I often get is, how do I know if my students are ready to start explicit and systematic, rule-based instruction, an Orton-Gillingham-based, method of teaching reading and spelling? How do I know if they're ready? Well, to that, I ask the question, where is your student at? What's their current knowledge base in terms of alphabetic code and phonemic awareness? And this can get kind of gray and fuzzy for a lot of people. So I created 3 screeners, which really I use as 4 screeners that can be used to help you tell if your students are ready. What you're looking at here on the right-hand side of the page is a prerequisite skills summary form. This has all of the 3 screeners listed here, so you can just kind of keep track of them all in one spot. And and use this for reference. So let's take a look at what these screeners are. But first, let's take a look at the skills they're going to assess. Before starting explicit and systematic spelling instruction, you're really using an Orton-based approach. Students need to know the majority of their basic letter sound correspondence. They need to know basic auditory discrimination. Can they hear the difference, the subtle difference between very similar sounds? It's okay if they have one or two sound confusions. You can teach that and plug those holes by training them to pay attention to what their lips are doing, pay attention to what your tongue is doing, but if they have several issues with this auditory discrimination, 3, 4, 5 different issues with different letters, this is something that's going to have to be addressed, or they're just going to keep hitting a wall in their spelling and reading, and it's going to get in the way. Thirdly, they need to have basic phoneme segmentation sounds. So just like we looked at the phonemic kind of ladder earlier, we want to make sure kids can hear that top is made of 3 distinct sounds. Cub is made of 3 distinct sounds. Can they segment those sounds apart? Conversely, with that basic letter sound correspondence, we can flip this screener, which I'm going to show you in just a moment, and we want to make sure the kids can spell the sounds. So give them the sounds, and can they write the letters for those sounds? So here's the first screener I created. I do have video demonstrations on how to use these, but I've got some brief directions here. Essentially, the teacher states the sounds real clearly to the student, the prompted sounds in the left-hand side of the screener. The student does not see any letters. They only have manipulatives in front of them. You can use tiles or tokens. And the student has to repeat those sounds in order. Next, the student pulls down a colored tile to represent each sound while simultaneously saying the corresponding sound. And thirdly, the student repeats those sounds one more time in the correct order while pointing to each corresponding tile. So they're touching and saying each sound. Now, this gets at really two distinct skills. We're looking, can the student hear the subtle differences between very similar sounds? If they have a major problem with this, boy, we've got to go back and plug some of these holes before we really can progress in reading and spelling. Secondly, it looks at, can the students hold on to 3 sequences of sounds? Can they hold on to them long enough to work with them 3 separate times? And you might be surprised when you start giving this to some of your students. I always give this as a precursor before I start instruction with students, because it lets me know whether I need to teach some more background before we jump in and kind of go whole hog with, a reading intervention or spelling intervention. If a student really has trouble with this, I'll usually pull in a Linda Mood Bell train. So we'll pull in some auditory discrimination in depth and sequencing of sounds. We'll start from 2 sounds and we'll build up to 3 sounds. This is where you're going to see breakdown of auditory memory as well. So if a student can't repeat back 3 sounds in order, they can't repeat back the 3 sounds, the correct sounds at all, time and time again, you're seeing an issue with auditory memory. So this screener we could talk about for probably quite some time here. There's lots of information and insights you'll get from that. Secondly, this is really a very basic screener, basic concept. You can find stuff like this all over the internet, but you're just basically, point to each letter and tell me its sound. Just get a basis. And, I share this with you, not because I think you might not think to do this, but because um, a lot of our older students, they're well past this point in the classroom. So it's not even on a teacher's radar if you're working with a third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader, that they might not know some of their letter sound correspondences. I mean, you've moved way past that point, but what I'm saying is if you have a struggling speller reader, go back to the basics. These are all non-negotiable. Just make sure, do they have their letter correspondence in place? Flip the screener. Use it as an encoding assessment as well. So take the letters away, give the students the sound, ask them to write the letter. Might look like this. I'm going to give you the sound. What sound? Students repeats the sound, write the letter for that sound, and the student should be able to write P. I'm going to give you the sound What sound? Student says write the letter for that sound, and the student would write the letter U. And this is going to just really give you some good insights in terms of whether or not students can go both ways between decoding and encoding of just basic letter sounds. Beyond that, we have a very simple phonemic segmentation screener. I use this screener for teachers who are going to start using the Silver Moon Spelling Rules curriculum, because that curriculum starts at a point that we have here. It starts with CVC, it starts with CCVC, and we have some CCV-CC words right away in lesson 1. So right away, before we get started with lesson 1, I want to know as an instructor, where's my student at with this? What kind of concepts or skill building am I going to have to teach them maybe before I start lesson 1 or during lesson 1 and throughout the first few lessons to build up those skills? All right, so whoops, I'm just going to mute some microphones here. I should have had in my settings that all the mics were muted when you come in. I apologize for that. It's probably my fault. It is important to teach the spelling rules. It really is important. Leaving out the rules when you teach spelling would be like leaving out the formulas when you're teaching math. They offer context to your teaching, and students do walk away with a deeper understanding of our language, which enriches reading and enriches spelling, and enriches writing. I can't imagine trying to teach a student to read and spell, a struggling reader and speller, void of the rules, because they really do make sense. They really are reliable. And when you start to teach these to kids in a way that makes sense, in a systematic and explicit approach, you see all sorts of light bulbs go on. They start to go, oh man, that's so cool. Why wasn't I taught that earlier? And you're just like, yeah, this is cool. This is very validating. It's fun to see the reactions kids have when they learn the reasons behind why we spell the way we do. So if you teach spelling rules already, and you've got a great system for teaching spelling rules, great, totally awesome. But if you teach spelling rules and you kind of teach them salt and pepper style, you kind of just sprinkle them in here and there. And if you find yourself feeling a little confused about some of the rules, or maybe disenchanted with some of the rules or teaching the rules, if you find yourself feeling that way, then your students probably feel that way too. So if you need a really solid rule-based system that's explicit, Silver Moon would be a fantastic fit for you. What's cool about it is it's not comprehensive. It is a supplemental curriculum. So if you're an expert in the field, you just dovetail these rules right into your reading intervention that you're currently using. If you're a novice, you would use the scope and sequence as is listed here so that you can maintain fidelity and keep a more controlled curriculum. So I'm simply showing this to you because a lot of teachers like to see basically the scope and sequence of concepts and in what order they're being introduced. So in this first kit of Silver Moon, we introduce closed syllable patterns and open syllable patterns. We're looking at lots of different spelling rules. There are 21 of them total. And we start at the one syllable level in rules lessons 1 through 6, and we move into the multi-syllable patterns in the rest of the lessons throughout book 1. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just wanted you to kind of see what the scope and flow is of this program, because just like I showed you the phonics development before, the phonics development chart, this is another developmental way that you could start infusing spelling rules into your reading instruction or your spelling instruction in a research-based manner. This is aged for kids 6 and up. And if you work through all 3 of the kits, you can kind of peruse what the concepts here are. We've got schwa patterns, units of sound, those different units of sound that end with NG, NK, LDs, LTs. You would have taken students through all of the content regarding spelling rules and syllable types and structure that they would need at around the 3rd grade level. So as universal material, you'd start at 6 years old and you would use this through about the end of 2nd grade, maybe the beginning of 3rd grade, working through all 3 books. As an intervention, these skills are non-negotiable. So you can pick this up and use it with any age. I've got actually adult learners, English language learners using this program. I have some high school teachers using it for their deeper understanding of English language spelling rules in their high school classes. It's blown my mind how many different types of classrooms have found value in learning what these spelling rules all are. Our book 3 gets into vowel teams and bossy R. Backwards to book 2. If I go backwards, book 2 was the sticky units of sound, the NGs and Ks, as well as silent E and consonant LE. And I'll let you look at this more on your handouts or on the video later. Of course, you want to teach your suffix spelling rules and your prefixes, your suffixes. You want to interweave this all. And so we have a standalone book being released within the next year on suffix spelling rules. Here's a little preview of our artwork for this. This was pretty exciting to come up with. We got the drop, the double, the change rule, and those are also baseball concepts. So you don't want to drop the ball and when you're trying to tag someone out. You got the change up, which is a pitch, and you've got the baseball hitter sliding in for a double. So it's kind of fun. All right, let's take a pause. So what's the content I need to teach? And what challenges will I see along the way? Go ahead and jot down your thoughts. I mean, we went through a ton of content just now and several different examples of what you actually need to teach, what's non-negotiable, and what a lot of those challenges are you'll see along the way. Okay, so let's move into our 3rd conundrum. In this section of the presentation, we're going to have a few videos that we'll pop into and watch, so a little different media, and we're going to discuss how spelling can be taught in a way that makes sense, 1, builds understanding, 2, and is memorable and fun, right? Because spelling has a bad rap. It's really known for being boring and not very fun. But it can be if we teach it the correct way. So moving forward, the first way to teach spelling in a way that makes sense, is memorable and fun, is to use a consistent lesson format. Here are the lesson procedures I like to use when I'm working with students. I always warm up with a sound drill and a brief review of previous concepts. I always share where we're going. What are our lesson objectives? What are our goals? I explicitly teach our new concept. I use a model lead test approach. That might be old school language. Newer language might be I do, we do, you do. If you're familiar with Anita Archer, she's the expert at this. And here you're building understanding as you attach new learning to previous knowledge. During this piece of instruction, you're practicing with real words, you're practicing with nonsense words, you're interweaving memory aids along the way, mnemonics, visuals, you're using simultaneously multisensory strategies. These are all parts of that Orton-Gillingham-based or structured literacy-based methodology. In the end, you want some authentic application. You want some extension activities. You want to make sure these skills are generalizing, and you want to integrate your spelling concepts with your reading concepts. So if you're picking up a program like Silver Moon, a lot of people are dovetailing that program into the scope and sequence they're using for reading, which works really beautifully. All right. Secondly, a second way to teach spelling so it makes sense, is memorable, and is fun is by using guided practice procedures. And this was part of the third bullet point on the previous slide. I felt this could use a little more breakdown. So the we do, or the lead part of your instruction, is what we're referring to. And this is what that looks like. The student is going to hear the word that you're proposing they spell. You want them to repeat the word back to you or out loud, so you make sure they're pronouncing that word correctly. You want them to say that word slowly, as if blending it, and you can even use a slow swoop in the air with your hand to kind of give them a visual for that slow swoop or that blending. You're going to do that for one-syllable words. If you're in multi-syllable words, you're going to have them tap the syllables, possibly on the table in front of them. So animal would be an-i-mul. Next, you can finger spell the word. Have the student assign one sound per finger while they finger spell. And you can do this at the syllable level or at the one syllable level. So we kind of fade that out when it's not needed anymore. It's a lot of scaffolding that goes on here. You're having them write the sounds. So say the sounds that you just finger spelled or you just stated when you tapped your syllables, and write the letters on your paper. Now we're going to check your work. Check your sounds, check your letters. Do you need any spelling rules, etc.? We're definitely going to watch a video that demonstrates this because it's a lot to take in just auditorily. So we're going to get to that in just a moment here. One thing I do want to share, though, is a lesson plan template. So, our teachers they're using all different types of Orton-based programs, structured literacy-based programs. Some people are truly just Orton-Gillingham trained and they're writing their own lesson plans. I was working with a university in Wisconsin who wanted to take the Silver Moon curriculum and use it and implement it for their dyslexia micro-credential program. Very exciting. So what I did was I created a lesson plan template that would allow their practitioners to nest these Silver Moon lessons, these spelling procedures into a structured literacy lesson plan so that they would know exactly where it would fit and how this would work and what it would look like. And so this is an example of that. We would start our lesson plan with our 3-part drill, which is traditional Orton-Gillingham. We would see and say, so you're showing your grapheme cards, your letter cards, the students are saying the sounds. We're going to say and write. So you're saying the sounds, the students are writing the letters. We're going to do a blending activity where you have your beginning, middle, and end sounds, and students are blending real and nonsense words. Okay, that's our intro here. Then we're going to move into a phonemic awareness activity. You've already pre-screened for this, so you know which skills are deficit and which ones you're targeting. You could use Kilpatrick for this, Hegarty, or you could use another source, but you do want to target those weak areas and build them up. After this front loading is done, you can jump right into your spelling lesson, your systematic and explicit spelling lesson. And if you're using the Silver Moon curriculum for this, you would start with step 1 in your lesson plan, in your text. You'd move into steps 2 and 3. You'd share your goals. You'd share the new rule or the concept that you're explaining. You'd move into steps 4 and 5, where you're giving guided practice with real and nonsense words. And ultimately, you're going to transition from that spelling work into phrases for spelling and reading dictation, sentences for spelling and reading dictation, and then connected text. So from here, there's some other pieces that you can add if you are working on your red letter words or your heart words. Those are two different terms that can be used synonymously for those irregular words. You move into your independent practice page and extension activities. So as you notice, anything with the blue headers jumps into the Silver Moon lesson plan and in the Silver Moon curriculum. Those are your big spelling components, your systematic and explicit spelling components. Anything with the black headers are your integrated reading components. That's that reciprocity or reciprocal relationship you see with the reading and spelling. If you're working with a younger student, they might also need some alphabet activities. It's optional, as necessary. Well, you're getting a lot of information this evening. So let's see some of this in action. I'm talking a lot at you. I'm talking a ton, and I feel like you need to see some of this. So we're just going to watch about 1.5 minutes of this video lesson demo. And then I'll fast forward and we'll watch about another 30 seconds here. But refer back to some of those strategies we just talked about and see if you can pull some of those out of this lesson demo. See if you can locate some of those. So let me just pull this over into view. Can everyone see the video in front of you now? Can you just give me a thumbs up? If you can see it, awesome. Thank you for that sign. I appreciate that. Okay, so here we go. This little girl is working on a new spelling rule. So we're going to introduce to you what that looks like. And then we'll show you some of that guided practice where she's finger spelling and then using sound boxes or Elkinen boxes to put those sounds down on paper or whiteboard. Here we go. Yeah, I think we might have. So today's rule is called Sick Elk. And this rule is going to teach us that you only use a CK at the end of a word if it's right after a short vowel. Otherwise, what will you use? Okay. Okay, great. So take a look at your new spelling rule card and tell me about the picture. What do you see in the picture? Yeah, I called him an elk. Yeah. Why do you think he's holding a Kleenex?
Because he's sick.
He's sick. He's not doing too hot. Can you find any clues in the picture that might help you remember part of the rule?
Is it CK?
Yeah, you're right. There is a CK. All right. Why do you think the words sick and elk are used for this rule's name?
Because it will probably be about the spelling words with the word CK and then K.
Yeah, you're right. And did you notice something about
The I?
Yeah.
What kind of vowel is it?
Short.
It's short. And how can you tell?
Because it has a dip over it.
Yeah, it has a little teacup over the top of it, which indicates that it's short. Good. Nice work. Flip this card over. And go ahead and read the rule out loud to me.
At the end of a word, always spell with a CK. After a short vowel, other words, use K.
Do you think you can tell me the sick L?
Okay, so that's part of the, explicit instruction she's getting on this new spelling rule. And you should have noticed a lot of just clues, mnemonics and picture clues and, the dip, that's what she called the short vowel mark over that I, that helps her remember and understand that concept. So let's fast forward just a little bit here. And let's watch some of the guided practice. Here we go.
First word is milk.
Milk.
Say the word slowly. Wonderful. I'm going to draw sound boxes on this board. Remember, sound boxes are boxes we can use to put one sound in each or one unit of sound in each. So I'll give you the marker back. Finger spell milk and fill in your boxes. Excellent work. Now tell me, why did you choose a K at the end and not a CK?
Because this is a constant, and use a CK. Short vowel.
Great, that was a perfect explanation. So let's practice.
Okay, and then from here, we move on to practice, a mix of real and nonsense words. But so that'll give you an idea of what is meant if you're not familiar with finger spelling and using sound boxes and in some of these approaches here. So moving on, let's see what we have next. All right, so we're still talking about ways to teach spelling, so it makes sense, so it's memorable, and so it has just a little more fun factor. A big part of the spelling rules I designed for my system is just simply the images, because kids love pictures, they love animals, they love action with animals and images, and they like searching for those patterns. There's patterns embedded in each of the pictures, so it just really kind of brings things for life for them. So that takes care of the fun part, really. But syllable patterns are a way to make more sense of spelling, when you're teaching spelling patterns. These are really non-negotiable too. So I like to teach syllable patterns using this anchor charts and these visuals as part of the student's resource folder. And, if you're not familiar with teaching syllable types, the reason we teach them is because it makes the vowel sounds predictable. So, closed syllable is going to produce a short vowel sound, and open syllable is going to produce a long vowel sound. And so on and so forth. There are some other nuances to some of these, but knowing where your syllables divide and what types you have within your words also makes it a lot easier to sound out your words, of course, to kind of chunk them down and sound them out. This particular sheet is available for download at silvermoonspellingrules.com. I use this one for students all the time. I don't have the names of the syllable types on this sheet because the visuals trigger the name, so they look at the vowel in this first image being closed off by this consonant, and they see the dip, the teacup, the short vowel mark, and they remember, oh, that's indicative of a closed syllable that's closed. So the visuals are really meant as a learning tool. This I would not give to a student. This is for teachers. And this is just a nice reference key for teachers if you're not familiar with what all these different types of syllables are, what the exceptions are to them, and what the sound examples are. You could download this as well. This does have the types labeled. And fourthly, we want to teach division rules, syllable division rules. And explicit syllable division rules, it can be taught. It's kind of akin to giving students a formula to divide words up. And, the whole goal is to practice this on paper, to teach them to identify their vowels, count how many consonants are in the middle, and then use the formula accordingly. If there's 3 letters, give it a 1-2 split. If there's 4 letters in the middle, give it the 1-3 split. And when they do this on pencil paper enough, it starts to generalize. And they no longer have to dot and divide syllables on paper. So this really and truly is a huge tool for students who have dyslexia or students that struggle with spelling because of dysgraphia. Not all students, neurotypical students, will need this level of instruction, though it might be helpful. If you're unfamiliar with syllable division rules, and I'm speaking Greek right now to you, it's okay. Everyone's got to start somewhere. We have a guide on our website, once again, silvermoonspellingrules.com, and you are welcome to download that guide. We are also producing a series of teacher tutorials to help you know how to define the different types of syllables to your students, how to teach those, and how to use these division rules. What's really exciting is that the Silver Moon team is rolling out a digital platform very soon, probably within the next 6 months. And that digital platform will have a free subscription base that you can subscribe to and get access to all sorts of helpful guides and tutorials. So very, very exciting. Fifthly, we want to support memory. Memory is kind of a theme that keeps coming up in this presentation. So you do that through visuals, you do that through mnemonics, through deliberate practice, very purposeful practice. You use spaced practice and retrieval, so recalling information over time. You can use some storytelling. Try to create or share a story that links learning to previous learning. And a lot of these strategies come right out of the research on how to be a good studier. And if you're familiar with the book Make It Stick, Make It Stick is a really great read on how we can study smarter and not harder. So let's take a look at this storytelling piece. We've got an example here of a teacher using a story structures activity with one of her students. This is just a really fun example. I'll give you a little background on this little guy. He's a 5th grader. He's starting from ground 1. He can speak English very well, but he cannot write English well. He needs a lot of help with his spelling. He comes from a family who his parents did not speak English as their primary language. They spoke an African language. I forget what the language was. So he's got multiple languages going at home. And this teacher found that these really discrete spelling rules that we're using in Silver Moon were just a huge help for him. So check this out. We're just going to watch just over a minute and a half or so. Here we go.
Yesterday, we learned the Queen Male Roof.
I still don't see that Q-O-D.
You don't see the Q? You? You don't see that?
No. You might gotta get rid of the arm. Okay,
so he's giving her a hard time a little bit here, going into middle school almost. This is kind of fun to watch. But so now we're going to fast forward to this activity. So you saw the concept she's teaching. QU says qua. If you hear qua in a word, it's spelled with a QU. So she uses a story structures activity, and he doesn't want to write. So she starts writing, but she's just a master at what she's doing, because watch how she gets him to take over the writing. Here we go.
Cool. Let's read that again. Q is never without you. QU says two sounds. Cool.
Okay.
That's where we have our mouth coming in,
This-
beginning and going out. So Lincoln, we are going to write a story about Queen Quail. So I want you to put on your clever, imaginative brain, and let's see if we can create a story about Queen Quail from what we are seeing in this picture, okay? Hold on, I'm gonna write this as you do it. So Queen Quail
Is in
You go a little faster than that. I can keep up. A little bit.
Queen Quail's in the president's house, and that's as far as I can get to. And
And what is she gonna do there? Can you think of any other words that start with what did she do there?
what's your job?
And she. Quit.
To you.
Yeah.
I
What?
don't know you in the story.
Did I make a mistake?
Yes,
Can you fix it? What mistake did I make?
no, you.
That's
You
right.
don't check all of these.
Yes, you better.
Look at their.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That's cute.
No.
Is never without you.
And
Okay, start a new sentence. We're not gonna keep going and.
Okay, so this is just such a cool example of, how she's getting this 5th grade student to work with a really quite elementary concept, but he's buying in, he gets it, and he's finding her mistakes and fixing her mistakes, which is fun to see. All right, so some strategies used in this teaching technique in the video. Definitely visualization. You've got your image on the card and the storytelling. You got mnemonics. So the Queen Quail is mnemonic based. The QU is embedded in the rule's name. You definitely have deliberate practice. It's purposeful application of the qua sound multiple times. You've got spaced retrieval, space practice and retrieval. So, this phonetic concept was taught in an earlier lesson. So she's coming back to it to review it. And the storytelling to reinforce learning through the, application and writing process. So lots of good stuff going on here. I do want to show you how I introduce spelling rules and what some of those rules are. I've just got 4 of them I'm going to show you. Because you can have a lot of fun teaching spelling rules. It just depends on how you present them. So let's pretend for a moment you're a 7-year-old student. You're in the 1st or 2nd grade. I'm your teacher, and I'd show you the following picture. So I'm showing you this picture of this cool zebra, and I'm going to say, "Hey class, I'd like you to meet Sam." What kind of animal is Sam? That's right. Yeah, he's a zebra. Guess what he loves to eat? You'll get all sorts of, feedback on this, but I'll tell you, Sam really loves to eat fried zucchini. Have you ever had zucchini before? Well, you've probably never had zucchini like Sam's. His zucchini is special. Do you see anything special about his fried zucchini? What letters do you notice? And the kids will see the F, the L, the S, and the Z, of course. And then you guide them down that discovery path to notice that they're all doubled letters. And we're going to look into the steam and notice that, oh, look at, there's one vowel floating up in the steam. So this is the same as the floss rule. It's just packaged a little bit differently with a little more interest. You know, you got a cool animal, he's doing something really silly that he shouldn't be doing. And you've got all these visual cues and clues to help the student remember what the actual rule is. So these are presented on a flashcard style, in a flashcard style manner. You give the lesson and the student essentially earns this flashcard after they've finished mastering their rule or learning the rule. The front of the card has the front image with the Samlo's fried zucchini, and the back of the card has the definition. What's fun about this spelling convention is, you know, a lot of people go, oh, that rule doesn't work. You've got these rule breakers, gas and bus and yes and as and is and has. But there's some logic to the rule breakers. Gas seems like it breaks this rule, but really it's an abbreviation for gasoline. So it's a longer word. Bus, surprisingly enough, is also an abbreviation for a longer word, for omnibus. Is, as, has. These are all those, you know, what typically our schools call them sight words, and they end with that S saying z, as, is, has. So when you get those little tiny words that end with that Z sound, as opposed to a nice soft S sound, that's an indication that this rule is not going to be used. So you really can explain away these rule breakers. So kids feel confident using the rule, so you feel confident teaching the rule. This is only used for one syllable words. When we get into multi-syllable words, we have different rules that we're going to apply. Here's another example of a basic spelling convention. Most people are familiar with this concept. When to use C at the beginning of the year of words versus when to use K. And our Cubs here and Ken help students to realize that C is used for at the beginning if there's an A, O, U, or consonant right after it. And a K is used for K at the beginning if there's an E-I-Y following that sound. And the reason is that you're going to explain to students in your lesson that C will say it's soft sound, it's S sound, if it's followed by an E-I or Y. And the fun part of this is the kids are searching for those clues. So they're searching for the AOU in the Cubs picture, and they're searching for the EIY in the Ken picture. And as I did with Sam for Loves Fried Zucchini, you can create a whole dialogue about this card, and you can change that dialogue depending on what age you're working with. You know, so it's appropriate for the age you're with. But these are awfully engaging. So pay close attention though, because I'm going to quiz you in just a moment. So this is for the beginning of words, at the beginning. This convention is for the end of words. Okay. So sick elk was a demonstration you saw with the little girl in the video. This of course helps us know when to use CK versus K. And there's a note to this one, you know, multi-syllable words that end with ick, like ick, that's gross. That's when we get into an IC pattern versus ICK. And that's something we teach a little bit more down the road. So this is for the end of words, our sick elk. And this is what I call, this next slide or card, rule card, is what I call a combination rule. I call it a combination rule because you have to know the Cubs and the Ken rule, and then you have to know the sick elk rule in order to learn this rule, because this is going to combine those concepts and help you to teach in the middle of words. You know, when do I use a C? When do I use a CK? And when do I use a K? Whoops, I think someone's mic might have turned on accidentally. Oh, here we go. Found it. Gotcha. Okay. And this rule is for words with 3 or more syllables. So this is down the road a little bit in Silver Moon Book 1, and you're getting into more complex words here. This can be confusing for teachers. If you're totally new to this type of teaching and you're totally new to these spelling rules, we have created some resources to support you. So let me go back here. If you pop into our blog on the Silver Moon website, you're going to notice each blog has a link at the end of it. And in those links, we have all sorts of free reproducibles. And these reproducibles include activity pages and games that you can play in remote instruction if you're an online private tutor or therapist, or in person at school. You can print these things off, laminate them, and use them. But here's a great example of this rule and kind of the thought map or the thought process you'd have to go to determine which spelling pattern you're going to use in the middle of a word when you're trying to deal with a k sound. So let me give you an example. Let's take a look at the word napkin. So when I'm trying to determine if napkin is spelled with a C, CK, or K, I always have to start with the letter C. And essentially what you're going back to is your Cubs and Ken rule when you're looking at the letter C. Because if I put a letter C in this blank line where napkin is here, I have to ask myself, if I put a C there, will it say the K sound? Or will it say a soft sound? Is there an E-I or Y after it? And you're going to notice that there is an E-I or Y, so that C would not say the correct sound. So I can't use a C in that spot. So we're going to tuck that away, and we're going to go on to our next option. We're going to take a look at the CK. Now, if I put a CK in that blank spot, I'm asking myself, is there a short vowel before that k sound? And this question goes back to your sick elk rule. That's why this is a combination rule. If there is no short vowel, and there is not, then I just have to use a K. Poor old K, he's last. Now, this is really as complex as they get. This takes a little more thought process, but kids, surprisingly, it's so logical. They catch on very quickly, provided you front loaded with the correct rules, the Cubs and Ken rule and the sick elk rule. They get this, they latch on quick to it, and they're so tired of guessing at how to spell. They love getting these rules because they can finally understand why they're spelling the way they are. Okay, so we are doing pretty good on time here. If you want to try some of our reproducibles and some of our games, this is what you do. You're going to go to this website, the silvermoonspellingrules.com/blog. You're going to pick a blog, read the blog. It'll help you understand the rule, whether you own the material or not. This is going to help you with spelling rules if you're confused about it. You can download the activity pages and you can give them a whirl, try them out. These are soon going to be organized in a really easy to find spot. We're going to have our digital platform up and running pretty soon, I'd say within 6 months at least. And there you'll have a hub where you can access all of our reproducibles very easily, all of our games easily, tutorials, and as well as a professional teachers forum where you can go in and ask questions and share advice and share tips and tricks you found that have worked. So you can do this application piece on your own time. For now, I have another video. You know, one end of spelling is application. It's applying the rules to your writing. The other end of spelling rules, because that's one important layer in our cake, remember, is sitting back and being able to identify those rules within words that you're practicing reading. So as opposed to doing a word sort, I have a little twist on a word sort that I call a rule sort. And so let's check out just a portion of this video. We're going to watch about 3 minutes of this rule sort because it might be something new that you haven't seen before. Hi, everyone. I'm back here and I'm going to show you what I use quite often as an activity to help students with practicing and identifying spelling rules that they've been taught. You know, one part of learning a spelling rule is application. It's applying the rule to words, which is a lot of the practice you're going to get when you're using the instructor's manual, as well as the activity pages that I just shared with you earlier when Kate was with us. And, you know, the other part of practicing a spelling rule is really identification. It's being able to look at a word and identify those letter patterns that follow a specific generalization. So this is pretty simple to do. You know, what you're going to want to do is grab a deck of index cards or something similar and just write out some simple words that follow the spelling rules that you're looking to practice. So this deck of cards here is going to follow our Cubs Can Drink Cola. My deck of cards here are going to follow a previous rule that the kids already learned that we haven't talked about in this video. This is the sick elk rule, which helps you with k at the end of words. I also made a deck of cards that follow the very first rule that we blogged about in the last video blog. And this one is the Sam loves fried zucchini rule, which is going to be also known as your floss rule with your F, L, S, and Z at the end. Once you have your cards created, you're just going to give them a nice shuffle. We'll mix these up. And you'll have your students grab their rule cards and place them out in front of them on a table or other flat surface. If they get confused about what these rules mean, I notice you got kind of a glare here, but you'll get the general idea. You know, they can always flip the card over and take a look at the definition on the back. So if I were to play this with a student, we could alternate turns. If I pull up the first card is kiss, you got the student reading the word, and then you got them thinking about, you know, where would that word fall? Is it a kind Ken rule? Is it Cubs Can Drink Cola? We're going to categorize those as one and the same because the target sound is the same sound. Yeah, it could fit there, but guess what? It could also fit somewhere else. This could also be a Sam loves fried zucchini rule, but it would not fit here. So we could place that card, you know, right in between these two rules to indicate that this word follows two different spelling rules. If I flip through my cards, my next word is script. Your student can read that word, and then they're again determining where that word would land. This is a great one to pull during this vlog because you're going to notice you got this blend here with the SC, and the SC blends and the SK blends actually do qualify for your K rule at the beginning of words. So the same logic is followed. You know, if you don't have an EI or Y after that C, and you do need the K sound, you're going to pick a C. So you're going to follow the Cubs rule. And so we can just file that right over here. And, you know, as you can see, we've got different rules in these cards. We've got the word check. I see a CK at the end. Students already learned that in lesson 3 of the instructor's manual. Again, we're all okay. I think you get the clue here. So that's one activity that's really fun to do. When you just need some review time and you want to kind of flip the script to get from application to identification. Okay, just a couple more things to get through this evening. And I'm noticing we've got just a few chats going on in the chat here. And so we'll get to those at the end during our question portion. But let's talk about schwa just a little bit, because schwa is the most common vowel sound in the English language, and yet it is the most confusing. Schwa it really is a conundrum in and of itself to many teachers and students, because it simply is not understood quite often. The schwa sound is a short U sound. It says so it's kind of like a thinking sound. A funny story, I was working with a middle school student. I was teaching him the schwa concept, and it was a beautiful summer day because I was working with him during the summer day, and he comes in to do a reading lesson with me, and of course he wants to be outside playing basketball instead. So I said, hey Nick, let's review real quick. We're talking about schwa. What sound does schwa make? He puts his head in his hands and he just goes, so yeah, you got it. That's what it is. He goes, wait, what, I did? So it really is a thinking sound. So in order to teach schwa in the 4 schwa spelling rules to students, I mean, this is going to help reading, it's going to help spelling, it's going to help both. You want to make sure students know how to identify closed and open syllables. They've got to know that before you start working on schwa. Schwa only occurs in unaccented syllables. The joke is, other letters are jealous because schwa is not stressed. And, accenting can be a really difficult concept for our students who have learning disabilities. And oftentimes I kind of navigate around accenting. I'll teach them what it is, but if they really truly have a hard time hearing those accents, we'll navigate around that by teaching spelling or sound choices. Can you flex that sound? If an open A doesn't say A, what's another sound it could say? Oh, it could say correct. So try reading or spelling that word with the sound. Instruction on syllable division rules greatly helps when spelling and reading with schwa, and this stuff should be mastered by a 3rd grade, which is kind of crazy. It's so neat how much how proficient students can be in this information when they're taught at such a young age. So the way I organize schwa is by 4 big concepts or 4 main schwa rules. Basically, there's 4 different patterns that can make the schwa sound, big patterns. One pattern I call the family cinema rule. This is for words that have 3 or more syllables. And what I'm doing is just following this chart right down the row. It doesn't read across. I think how I've color coded this might be a little confusing. I'd like to change it. So this family cinema is all one color going down the row. But hopefully you get the point. It's for open syllables that are unaccented. It only affects I's and E's in the middle of words that are 3 or more syllables. So for instance, the word family. Did you hear the Okay, so the I is the schwa, the I is the culprit here. Notice it's in the middle. It doesn't have to be the perfect middle letter. It just has to be between, the first letter and the last letter, and in at least a 3-syllable word. How about cinema? Ooh, there's a couple schwas in that word. Where did you hear the schwa sounds? Cinema. You should have heard one in the E, which is in the middle of the word. You should have heard another at the end, the at the end. The concept we're going for here in this pattern is our middle E and our middle I. that are not saying their short sound. Instead, they're saying the schwa sound. Now, the other schwa rule I always teach is the bacon salad rule. There is a visual that goes with this as well. And this is for words that have 2 or more syllables.
Yeah.
Whoops, someone's microphone is on again. If you don't mind just checking your mic, that would be great. Thank you so much. And this is for closed syllables. Schwa is always unaccented, so you're going to see all of these are unaccented, but it's only for O's and A's at the very end of a word. So listen for the schwa sound in bacon, un. Do you hear the O saying That's your schwa. How about salad? Salad. You should hear that A, that last A saying There's your schwa. So this is closed A's, closed O's at the end of a multi-syllable word. Family cinema is open I's, opens E's in the middle of a 3 or more syllable word. Travel by camel is yet another pattern. It's vowel L's at the very end of a multi-syllable word. So listen for the schwa in camel. Travel. It's the E's in both cases. And then majestic, America. I know we had several teachers register for this webinar from Canada. You could sub out the word Canada instead of America. Canada also has a lot of schwas in it, but this pattern you're looking for is open syllables, unaccented, and they're open A's. So that open A is your schwa. And then in America, we have 2 schwas, the first A and the last A. And if you're all sorts of confused about schwa, I mean, this is your cheat sheets, but these concepts are explained in detail very, very clearly in the Silver Moon Instructors Manuals. But we also have some blogs and vlogs on schwa. So check out the website and you'll find out more information. Another concept that can be confusing for students and teachers alike are vowel teams, and I could combine that with bossy R's. Bossy R's are confusing to teach too. Can you teach spelling rules for vowel teams? I get that question. I do, and a lot of OG systems do, but vowel team spelling rules, they enforce, you really want to teach them by positionality of vowel team, where that vowel team can be used in a word. We used the example of AY earlier in our webinar. Now, once you teach that base foundation, that base spelling rule for your vowel teams, your very common vowel teams, then you're going to start adding in alternate spellings for those long vowel sounds. So just like the cake has layers, we're going to layer in more information. You start with a solid rule and then you layer in some more information as you go. Essentially, as a graphic organizer and kind of a mind map, I like to give students a spelling choices chart. And the spelling choices charts is something that they can fill out very systematically as they go, as they work through spelling rules for their vowel teams, for their bossy R's, bossy W's, etc. And they will fill in which vowel teams you can use for the beginning for long A, which vowel teams you can use for the middle for long A, which vowel teams you can use for the end for long A, so on and so forth. And you will have some overlap here and there. What's cool about this is it empowers them to know there are multiple options, to know what those options are, and to not have to use their memory by rote to just recall on the fly. They can pull this chart out of the resource folder, look up the long vowel sound they need, and start working through their spelling choices. Pretty cool. So I'm all about empowering students to use their resources, to support their memory when memory is weak, and really getting them to be as independent as humanly possible with this spelling and reading piece. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. So that was conundrum number 3. So if you were to take a moment to pause and just write down, what are some strategies we went through that you could make spelling rules or spelling instruction in general make sense for kids? How could you build understanding for kids? How could you make it more memorable and more fun for students? You can pause this if you're watching the video back and just jot down some ideas. See if you could recall from our webinar what you just learned. That's a great way to support studying and memory. So, spelling does not have to be such a conundrum. It really doesn't have to be so confusing. If an informed educator can teach spelling logically and systematically and build skills in any type of student, whether they're the MJ of spelling, the contemplators of spelling, or the evaporated spelling, you had it, but you lost it. If you can teach explicitly and systematically, you're going to build each and every one of these types of spellers so they're a stronger speller and have more command over what they're doing and understanding. Spelling really truly does build the reading brain. So that really is a wrap right now. If you look forward down through this presentation, you have the link in your chat just so you can print the presentation. You can also email me privately and I can send it to you that way. You'll notice I've got my card here so you can contact me if you have questions about anything that I said. I have an informal list of sources that we used during the presentation. Most things were cited though by slide. And then I do also have 3 slides at the end here. Whoops, we've got someone's video microphone on here that's given a lot of feedback. If you could check your mics, that would be awesome. Thank you. I've got 3 different kind of handouts that you could use if you are looking for more print information on how this whole Silver Moon curriculum piece works. And I'm not going to go through that right now because it is 8 o'clock, almost on the dot. So let's take a look at our chat here and see what we've got here in terms of questions. And if you need to log out, feel free to log out, and this will keep recording. We'll send the recording to you, tomorrow sometime. We've got Augie she says that I find etymology and morphology so hard to teach because I feel like I'm having to learn them alongside my learners. So true. I would agree with that, as well as the spelling rules, right? Depending on your proficiency as a teacher, a lot of times we are kind of building the plane while we're flying it. And, just keep on learning. I'm still learning a lot about etymology and morphology myself. I find the whole area really, really fascinating. Brittany says, how do you support a student who has very weak auditory discrimination? What are some workarounds? Brittany, I would say, if you, I don't know that there are many workarounds for really weak auditory discrimination outside of giving some kinesthetic or visual cueing while you say the sound to support the processing of the correct sound. But there's one text in particular, Judith Birch's and Carricker's text on the simultaneously multisensory spelling instruction of basic language skills. It's the blue text with a sunflower on the front. She really goes into how to plug those holes in auditory discrimination in great detail, and really, if you're not using workarounds and you are teaching how to hear those sounds, you're going to teach how to hear them through other senses, through sense of touch, through sense of feel, and through sense of sight, you know, and oftentimes that instruction involves using mirrors. Dorothy, thank you for your note here. Dorothy says that the See the Sound Visual Phonics program is inexpensive and easy to adapt, and I'm not familiar with that one. Should I pick it up?
It was actually developed for the deaf to help deaf children understand phonemes so they could break the alphabetic code. It's a system of hand signs for sounds. So, ow, ooh, various hand signs. And it's very inexpensive. And you just plug it in. It works magic. We use it in our district. It's gone international. It's adapted to the International Phonetic Alphabet. And it's really a game changer for these little kids who cannot remember the letter and the sound connections.
Yeah, it sounds excellent, actually.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that resource.
Sure.
All right, so some other chats on here. Dorothy, you've also got, how do you connect spelling and reading with middle school students? I see the value of teaching this with decodable readers, but not quite sure how to connect with two, do you have two middle school students in mind, Dorothy?
Yes, I do. I'm working with 6th graders. One is at the 3rd percentile. He has, I'm working with him using Orton Gillingham strategies, but I'm at a loss to find passages that he can read that apply the concepts that we're teaching, whether it's syllable division or whether it's the spelling connections, you know, the rules, the everything you've been talking about here.
Have you looked at any of, you know, William Van Cleve had a lot of, you know, phrases for dictation and sentences for dictation, and he had a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Van Cleve's. I think he recommended a book by Thomas Morgan that had the syllabication patterns in sentences. There was a list of 20 sentences using each pattern that students could read. But I haven't found anything that's more specific to sounds.
That was by Thomas Morgan. I'm going to write that one down too.
Yeah, I think that, I'm pretty sure that's it. I'll have to double check that.
You know, that's a hard question. You know, there's a lot of new publishers that are coming out with controlled decodable text. And then the trick is, you know, pairing that controlled decodable book with the sequence that you're using in your instruction, which I find so tricky. Recently, I'm friends with a woman who just founded a publishing company. It's Reading is Fun. And now her books are much lower level. They're geared towards your younger readers, and they follow the same scope and sequence as like Barton Reading and Spelling System does. But I asked her the same question. I said, well, how would you use your books for, say, a middle school student or an older student? And one recommendation she said, and that she uses with some of her students, is that she has the older students, you know, read to the youngers. You know, so, you know, the books are well below middle school level, but at the level the student is able to read, and they take some pride in reading to those younger students. Not exactly what you're looking for, but I thought that was kind of, you know,
but a good idea. Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions here? I don't see anything else in our chat, so thank you
No.
for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. Take care.
You're welcome. You everyone have a good night and be in touch if you've got questions. We'll see you later.
Hey, Kelly, really quick.